The morning started like any other, but something in the air felt different to her, as if the day was already waiting to test her patience. She walked through the school gates with her backpack pulled tight against her shoulder, hoping to slip inside unnoticed. She always hoped that, but school rarely allowed her to stay invisible, no matter how quiet she kept. She had learned long ago that blending into the background made life easier. She didn't talk much unless she had to, didn't argue with anyone, didn't draw attention to herself. She focused on her classes, did her assignments on time, and tried to stay out of trouble. But even with all her efforts, there were days when trouble seemed to find her anyway. She headed toward her locker, keeping her eyes low. The hallway buzzed with noise-slamming lockers, laughter, shoes squeaking on the old floor tiles. Everyone seemed to be waking up at their own pace, except her. She felt awake long before she got out of bed, the usual tightness in her stomach reminding her to stay alert, just as she reached her locker. She heard footsteps loud, confident, careless. She knew exactly who they belonged to. She stiffened, hoping he would just walk past today. But that hope broke the moment she heard his voice. "There she is," he said, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. Walking like she's sneaking into her own life. She let out a quiet breath, kept her head low, and spun her lock. Maybe if she didn't respond, he would get bored, but he never got bored. He leaned against the locker next to hers, pretending to take an interest in whatever she was doing, even though it was painfully clear he only wanted a reaction. He always wanted a reaction. That was how he seemed to fuel his jokes and boost his ego. He wasn't the type who pushed people into lockers or did anything that would get him into real trouble. Instead, he went for the smaller things, the comments, the teasing, the smirks. The kind of things that didn't leave bruises on skin, only on the heart. "Rough morning?" he asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't actually curious. "Or do you always look like you're waiting for a surprise quiz?" She stayed quiet and reached for a book. Her hands trembled slightly, something she hoped he didn't notice. He whistled. "Cold today. You shaking from the weather or something else?" She pressed her lips together, wishing he would lose interest. But experience told her that staying quiet sometimes made him push harder. Still, she didn't trust herself to speak without her voice breaking. When she didn't respond, he chuckled under his breath. "All right. Silent treatment. Classic." He didn't move until the bell rang, and even then, he walked away only after giving her a look that felt like a warning, though she didn't know of what. She gathered her books and headed to her first class, a little slower than usual, trying to shake off the feeling he left behind. Inside the classroom, she took her usual seat near the window. She always liked that spot. It wasn't too close to anyone, but it wasn't isolated either. The window gave her something to look at besides the constant noise of school life. Outside, cars pulled into the parking lot. Teachers carried stacks of papers. Leaves moved along the pavement with the wind. It was peaceful in a way the inside of the school never was. As more students filed into the room, she kept her face down and her notebook open. She could hear his voice from the hallway loud, full of energy, surrounded by the usual group of friends who laughed at almost anything he said. She braced herself without meaning to. He entered the classroom a moment later, still laughing at something one of his friends had said. For a second, she thought he might not notice her, but then his eyes flicked in her direction. "Hey," he said. Just a simple word. But the tone carried that familiar teasing edge. She looked down and pretended not to hear. He snapped his fingers. "Talking to you?" A couple of students glanced their way, waiting to see what he would do. She swallowed. "Hi," she said softly, because ignoring him in front of others usually made things worse. "That's the spirit," he said with exaggerated cheerfulness. Before taking a seat behind her, her heartbeat slowed once the teacher began talking, the lesson finally giving her space to breathe. But she couldn't fully relax, not when she could feel him tapping his shoes against her chair leg or hear him whispering jokes to the kid next to him. She didn't know why he picked her. She never bothered him. She wasn't loud or different in a way that usually attracted attention. She wasn't failing or excelling, just somewhere in the middle. Maybe that was why. Maybe picking on someone who didn't fight back made things easier for him as the class continued. She tried to focus on the board, taking neat notes even though her mind was drifting. She wondered what it would be like to come to school without fear of what the day might bring. She wondered what it would be like to walk the halls without flinching when she heard his voice. By the time the bell rang again, she had convinced herself things wouldn't get worse today. She packed her notebook and stood up carefully, trying not to draw attention, but as she stepped into the hallway, she felt her backpack tug sharply from behind. She spun around, startled, and saw him holding one of the straps loosely between his fingers. "Relax," he said. It was barely a pull. Her pulse quickened. "Please stop," she whispered. He tilted his head. "Stop what?" he asked, pretending he didn't understand. Before she could answer, a group of students walked past and he dropped her strap as if nothing had happened. She didn't wait around. She walked away quickly, hoping he wouldn't follow. Luckily, he didn't. He headed the opposite direction, caught up in another conversation. She reached her next class early and sat in the back row, letting out a slow breath once she was alone. She wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of pretending like it didn't affect her. Tired of feeling small. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of lessons and short interactions. She tried to keep her thoughts on her work, but her mind kept replaying every moment from the hallway. She knew people might think she was overreacting. After all, he wasn't doing anything dangerous or dramatic. But it wasn't about one moment. It was about all the moments. The pattern. The way he seemed to enjoy making her uncomfortable. During lunch, she found her usual spot in the corner of the cafeteria, away from the loudest tables. She unpacked her simple lunch, grateful for the quiet. She wasn't completely alone. Some students sat a few tables away, but she rarely joined anyone. It wasn't that people disliked her. They just didn't really notice her. And she didn't mind that. Not most days. She had just taken her first bite of food when she heard laughter from across the cafeteria. She knew that laugh. She didn't even have to look. Her shoulders tensed instinctively. A moment later, he walked past her table with two of his friends. He didn't stop, but he gave her a look half amused, half curious, as if he was deciding whether to bother her or leave her alone. For a moment, she hoped he would keep walking. He didn't. He walked backward a few steps, still facing her, raising his eyebrows. "Sitting alone again? You must really like the quiet." She stared at her lunch. "I'm not bothering anyone." "Didn't say you were," he replied, leaning slightly over the edge of her table. "Just wondering how you don't get bored sitting here by yourself every day." She shrugged. "I like it. Do you?" he asked, sounding genuinely surprised for a moment. "Huh." He glanced around, then back at her. "Well, enjoy the silence." He walked off, but the interaction left her unsettled. It wasn't just what he said. It was the way he looked at her, as if she were some puzzle he couldn't figure out. The rest of lunch passed quietly, but she ate faster than usual, wanting to escape before he could return. After lunch came her least favorite part of the day, the crowded hallway between classes. Too many people, too much noise, too much chance of running into him. She tried to move quickly, but not so quickly that she'd stand out. Halfway down the hall, she saw him leaning against a locker, talking with a group of students. She turned her eyes away and tried to slip through the crowd. Maybe he wouldn't notice. He noticed. "There she goes," he said. Not loudly, but loud enough for his group to hear. "Walking like she's late to something important." Someone in the group laughed. She felt heat rise in her face. But she kept walking. She didn't look back. Not until she reached her last class of the day. There, finally, she found a pocket of calm. This class was different. The teacher was gentle, the students quieter, the room filled with soft light from the high windows. It always felt like a small break from the rest of the school, but even here, her mind wandered. She wondered why he bothered with her. She wondered what he wanted. She wondered if he understood how uncomfortable he made her. And she wondered how much longer she could pretend everything was fine. When the final bell rang and school let out, she stayed seated for a moment, letting the room empty around her. Going home was always the best part of her day. There. She didn't have to worry about who might pull her backpack or who might shout her name from across the hallway. She took a slow breath and gathered her things before stepping outside. The air felt cooler now, almost refreshing. She walked down the steps and joined the flow of students heading home, feeling lighter with every step away from the building. But even as she walked, the day replayed in her mind his voice, his teasing, the way he always seemed to be watching her. It wasn't the worst day she'd ever had, but it wasn't good either, and deep down she knew something was changing. He had pushed things a little further than usual today. She didn't know why or what it meant, but she felt the shift. Something told her that today was only the beginning. The next morning, she woke up hoping that yesterday would fade from her memory, but it lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake off. She lay in bed for a few extra minutes, staring at the ceiling and listening to the quiet hum of the house. It was peaceful here, nothing like the constant noise and tension she felt at school. She wished she could stay home just once, without having to explain why. But she knew skipping would only make things harder later. She finally pushed herself out of bed and got ready for the day. She tried to pick an outfit that wouldn't attract attention, something plain and simple, blending in the way she preferred. Before leaving her room, she glanced in the mirror. Her eyes looked tired, a little sad, but she forced a small smile. "It's just another day," she whispered to herself. She had said that many times before. Downstairs, she ate breakfast quietly while her family got ready around her. They didn't know what happened at school, and she didn't want them to worry. She kept her problems tucked away, thinking it was easier that way. She told herself she could handle it. She always tried to handle things on her own. When she finally walked out the front door, she felt that familiar tightness in her stomach. The walk to school was short, but each step felt heavy, as if her feet were trying to hold her back. She wasn't afraid of anything dramatic happening. He never did anything that crossed a serious line. But the constant teasing, the surprises, the way he singled her out was enough to make each day feel unpredictable. As she approached the school gates, she kept her head down. Students gathered in small groups, chatting and laughing. The noise bounced off the walls of the building, growing louder with every step she took. She tried to focus on her breathing. In through her nose, out through her mouth. She did that whenever she felt nervous. When she reached her locker, she froze for a moment. She checked both ends of the hallway, almost without thinking. He wasn't there. Not yet. She quickly unlocked her locker and exchanged her books, her hands moving faster than usual. She wanted to finish before he showed up. But just when she closed her locker, she heard his voice from behind her. "Morning," he said, dragging out the word like it was a joke. She turned slowly. He was standing a few feet away, leaning against the lockers with his arms crossed. He looked well-rested, cheerful even, as if school was a place he enjoyed. He didn't seem to feel the pressure she did. "Hi," she replied quietly. "You look tired," he said, studying her face for a moment. "Late night writing in that little notebook of yours?" She felt her chest tighten. How did he even know she liked writing? She didn't talk about it. She never showed anyone her notebook except a trusted few. She hoped he was only guessing. "I don't stay up late," she said. "Sure," he replied, smirking like he didn't believe her. His tone wasn't harsh, but there was something in his eyes, curiosity mixed with amusement. She didn't understand why he was so interested in her. It wasn't the friendly kind of attention. It felt more like he wanted to see how she reacted to everything he said before she could step away. He reached forward and tapped the top of her backpack with 2 fingers. "What's in there today?" "A whole library," he joked. She stepped back slightly. "Just my stuff." "Your stuff," he repeated in a mocking tone, nodding as if she had said something mysterious. A couple of students nearby watched them, but no one said anything. Most people didn't get involved. Maybe they thought it was harmless? Maybe they didn't notice the way her shoulders tensed every time he approached. The bell rang, giving her the excuse she needed. She walked quickly toward her classroom, not waiting to see if he followed. Luckily, he didn't. He drifted in the opposite direction. Laughing with someone who had called his name, she slipped into her first class and took her seat. As the teacher began the lesson, she tried to let the words wash over her, hoping they would drown out everything else. But her mind kept drifting back to him. She didn't understand why he always seemed to zero in on her. He had plenty of friends. plenty of people who laughed at his jokes. Why waste time teasing someone who barely spoke? An hour later, she headed to her next class. The hallway felt extra crowded today. People brushed past her on both sides. She kept her arms close to her body, walking through the busy path like she was navigating a storm. Just when she reached the door to her classroom, she felt someone behind her. "You walk fast," he said. She didn't turn around right away. She closed her eyes for a brief second, gathering her courage. When she finally faced him, he was standing close, not enough to scare her, but close enough that she knew he had followed her intentionally. "I have class," she said softly. "So do I," he replied, glancing at the classroom behind her. "But I'm not going in yet." She wasn't sure how to respond. She didn't want to ask why, because she didn't want to invite a longer conversation. But he waited, expecting something from her. "Okay," she said, the only word she could think of. He laughed under his breath. "You always do that." "Do what?" "Say one-word things like you're afraid a full sentence might break the universe." She wasn't trying to be rude. She was trying to protect herself, but he saw it differently. "I'm not afraid," she said quietly. He raised an eyebrow. "Really?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped into her classroom, grateful when the teacher welcomed her in and closed the door. She let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. This class was calmer, and she tried again to focus. But his voice kept echoing in her mind. The way he said she was afraid, the way he watched her like she was hiding something. She didn't like that he noticed things about her. She didn't want anyone paying that much attention. When class ended, she waited by her desk for a moment, hoping the hallway would clear before she had to walk through it again. But when she finally stepped outside, she saw him leaning against the wall, waiting for someone. She hoped it wasn't her. He noticed her almost immediately. "There you are," said, as if she had disappeared from the earth for 40 minutes. She looked down and walked past him, but he didn't let her leave so easily. "You always walk away," he said, falling into step beside her. "You know, most people would at least look at me when I'm talking." She kept walking. "I'm going to lunch." "So am I," he replied. Great, she thought. This was exactly what she didn't want. The cafeteria was loud as usual, the air filled with chatter and clinking trays. She headed toward her usual quiet corner, hoping he would sit anywhere else, but he followed her. She sat down, feeling her heart sink when he placed his tray across from hers. "You don't mind, right?" He asked casually. She did mind. She minded a lot, but she didn't know how to say it without causing a scene. "It's okay," she said, though her voice was barely audible. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You know, you're not very easy to figure out." She blinked. "Why do you want to figure me out?" He shrugged. "Because you're quiet. And people who are quiet usually have something interesting going on inside their heads." She stared at him, surprised. That was the closest thing he had ever said that didn't feel like a joke. Or, he added, smirking, "You're just really boring. And I'm wasting my time trying to guess." Her small moment of relief fell apart. She looked at her food. "I don't know what you want." "I don't want anything," he said quickly. "Just talking." But it didn't feel like harmless talking to her. It felt like he was poking at her, waiting to see what would happen. They sat there for a few minutes. He made comments about the lunch, about the people walking by, about anything that came to his mind. She responded only when she had to. She wished he would leave her alone. She didn't know how to make that happen without making things worse. Finally, one of his friends called his name from across the room. He stood up. "See you later," he said, tapping her table lightly before walking away. She let out a long breath as soon as he was gone. Her hands shook slightly, and she clasped them together under the table. She didn't understand what he was trying to do. Was he teasing her? Watching her? Testing her? She had no idea. The rest of the day felt heavier than usual. She felt watched, even when he wasn't around. Every time she turned a corner, she expected him to be there. When the final bell rang, she didn't wait in the classroom like she usually did. She wanted to get home as fast as possible. She pushed through the doors and into the open air, breathing easier once she was outside. The walk home felt longer today. Each step felt like a question pressing against her mind. Why was he paying so much attention? Why wasn't he leaving her alone? And why did today feel different? Not just annoying, not just exhausting, but like something bigger was building up. She didn't have the answers yet, but she could feel it deep inside her. He had crossed some invisible line today, and she didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She woke up the next morning feeling like she hadn't slept at all. Her mind had been busy all night, replaying every word, every stare, every moment from the day before. No matter how many times she tried to push the thoughts away, they kept creeping back in. She turned over in bed and stared at the wall for a moment, wishing she could just stay home. But missing school wasn't an option. She knew that. She sat up slowly and rubbed her face. "I'm fine," she whispered to herself. She said it again, hoping the words might convince her. But deep down she knew she didn't feel fine at all. She forced herself out of bed and got ready for school. Her movements were slow, like she was walking through heavy fog. She brushed her hair, put on a simple outfit, and slipped her notebook into her bag. That notebook had become something of a comfort to her lately, even though she rarely let anyone see what she wrote. It helped her process her feelings. Downstairs, her family was busy getting ready for their day. She smiled politely, answered a few questions with short replies, and grabbed a piece of toast. She didn't want to talk much. She didn't want anyone to guess that something was bothering her. She wasn't good at explaining things, especially feelings. When she stepped outside, the air was crisp and cool. She took a long breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. The quiet of the neighborhood always helped calm her. Birds chirped in the distance, and the early morning sky was soft and pale. For a few seconds, she felt steady. But as soon as she reached the school grounds, the familiar tightness returned. Students streamed across the courtyard, heading inside or gathering in groups. The loud voices and laughter echoed against the walls. She felt small among the noise, like she was stepping back into a world she didn't belong in. She went straight to her locker, hoping she could get her things before he showed up. Her fingers worked quickly at the lock. Just as she opened it, she heard movement behind her. She froze. But when she turned, it wasn't him. It was just another student passing by. She let out a shaky breath and closed her eyes for a moment. Annoyed at herself for reacting so strongly, she grabbed her books and shut her locker, and made her way toward her first class. She kept her head down, weaving through the crowd, trying to avoid eye contact with anyone. She made it to her classroom without seeing him. For a moment, she felt relieved. She sat at her usual spot near the window. The teacher had not arrived yet, so the room filled with chatter. She stared outside, letting her eyes rest on the calm world beyond the glass. Cars moved along the street, and a few leaves danced in the wind. She liked watching small things like that. They made her feel grounded. As she waited for class to start, she thought about the past few weeks. He had always teased her before, but lately his attention had shifted. It wasn't just comments anymore. He was watching her, waiting for her, following her. Why? She had no idea. She tried to think of anything she might have done that would make him act this way, but there was nothing. She kept to herself. She didn't talk to his friends. She didn't cause trouble. She wasn't someone who attracted attention. So why her? The bell rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. Class began, and she tried to focus, but her mind drifted in and out. She wrote notes she barely understood. She stared at the board without really seeing it. Halfway through the lesson, she heard the door open quietly. She looked up. It was him. He walked in late, offering a casual apology to the teacher before taking his seat to rows behind her. He didn't say a word to her this time, but she felt his presence like heat on her back. She didn't dare turn around. She didn't need to see him to know he was there. Her chest tightened. She gripped her pen harder and forced herself to look at her notebook. She took a slow breath in and out. She just needed to make it through the class. When the bell finally rang, she gathered her things quickly. But not quickly enough. He caught up to her just outside the door. "Hey," he said, as if they were friends. She kept walking. "Hi. You left fast," he added, sounding amused. "I have somewhere to be," she said, though it wasn't true. He tilted his head. "You always have somewhere to be." "Busy life?" She didn't answer. He walked beside her for a few seconds, then leaned closer. not enough to scare her, but close enough that she could feel his attention sharpening. You know, he said, most people talk more than you do. I talk when I need to, she replied quietly. Yeah. But you don't talk to me, he pointed out. She stopped walking. Not because she wanted to talk, but because she didn't want to walk any closer to the crowd ahead. She turned to him slowly. You make it hard? He blinked. Hard. You tease me, she said, her voice soft but steady. A lot. He shoved his hands in his pockets and shrugged. It's just jokes. It doesn't feel like jokes, she said. He didn't respond right away. For a moment, his expression softened, almost like he wanted to think about her words. But then he smirked again. You're too serious, he said. And just like that, whatever tiny bit of hope she had felt disappeared. She realized he didn't get it. Or maybe he didn't want to get it. She walked away, leaving him standing in the hallway. She felt her heartbeat thudding in her ears. She didn't know why she had said that to him. She usually kept quiet, but the words had just slipped out. Her next class came and went, though she barely remembered any of it. She kept replaying their conversation, wondering if she had made things worse by speaking up. Maybe he would tease her even more now. Maybe he would think she was being dramatic when lunchtime arrived. She found her usual spot in the corner of the cafeteria. The noise around her felt distant, like she was underwater. She picked at her food, but didn't have much appetite. She opened her notebook and flipped through some pages. The soft scratch of pen on paper usually brought her comfort, but today she couldn't focus. Her thoughts were too restless. She felt someone approach before she saw them. She tensed, hoping it wasn't him again. But when she looked up, she saw a girl from her math class, a quiet girl, who sat 2 rows ahead of her. They had never talked before. Is anyone sitting here? The girl asked gently. She shook her head. The girl sat down and gave a shy smile. You're always here alone. Thought maybe you wouldn't mind company? She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I don't mind. They sat quietly at first, eating without talking. The girl wasn't chatty or loud. She didn't seem to want anything from her, which was comforting. Finally, the girl spoke again. I see the way he talks to you sometimes. She stiffened. She didn't want to talk about him. He's odd, the girl continued carefully. Always picking at people. But with you, it's like he's watching every move you make. She looked down. I don't know why. Maybe he doesn't either, the girl offered. They talked a little more about school, homework, teachers. Nothing deep, but it felt nice to have a normal conversation. When the lunch period ended, the girl smiled again. See you later, she said. Yeah, she replied softly as she walked to her next class. She felt a small sense of warmth. It wasn't much, but it reminded her that not everything about school was heavy. The afternoon went by with a bit more ease. She didn't see him for a while, which helped her relax. She began to think maybe he had lost interest, or maybe he was actually listening when she said he teased her too much. But just as she was packing up for her final class of the day, he approached her desk. You talked to me today? He said casually. She turned slowly, trying to hide her frustration. I talk sometimes. Not like that, he said. You actually said something real. She didn't know what to say. He leaned against the desk next to hers. So why does it bother you? She blinked. She hadn't expected him to ask. You tease me, she said quietly, and it makes me uncomfortable. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Something in his expression shifted just slightly, like he had finally heard her. I didn't know that, he said after a pause. You don't ask, she replied. He lowered his eyes for a moment. Maybe I should. Before she could respond, the bell rang. Students began leaving the room, and he stepped back, giving her space. I'll think about it, he said. She didn't know what that meant. She didn't know if she believed him. But for the first time, his voice didn't carry that teasing edge. It sounded sincere. The rest of the day passed quietly. When she walked home after school, she felt lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because something had changed. She didn't know if he would tease her again tomorrow. She didn't know if he understood how difficult things had been for her, but she knew this much. This was the turning point. Something had shifted, and she wasn't the only one who felt it. The classroom felt unusually still that morning. as if something in the air had shifted overnight. The light from the tall windows fell softly across the desks, and the quiet hum of students settling in blended with the faint tapping of pencils and shuffling of backpacks. She walked in slower than usual, but not from fear. It was something different now, something steadier. After the night she had, she felt like she was walking into the room with new legs. They were a bit shaky, but they still held her up. She took her seat, same one near the wall where she had spent so many days trying to make herself smaller. The familiar nervous feeling was there, but it didn't rule over her the way it used to. She kept her hands folded on her desk, breathing in through her nose, letting the air fill her lungs in a slow, careful wave. Today wasn't about fighting. It wasn't about yelling or proving something. It was just about being honest. She had gone over her words so many times the night before that she no longer felt like she had to rehearse them. They lived inside her now. When he walked in loud, careless, laughing with a few classmates, her chest tightened. He didn't see her at first. He rarely took the time to notice her unless it amused him. But when he finally looked her way, something in his expression twitched, like he could sense something was off. She didn't look down this time. She didn't pretend to rummage through her bag. She simply looked back at him. It wasn't a glare. It wasn't anger. It was a steady, quiet look that made him pause for half a second. He blinked, confused, then shrugged it off and went back to talking with the others. But that pause was enough to tell her that maybe he wasn't expecting what was coming. As the class began, the teacher moved through the usual routine, writing notes on the board, asking questions, guiding discussions. She listened, taking notes as best as she could, but her mind kept drifting to the moment she knew she had to face. Her heartbeat stayed steady, but she felt a strange warmth across her shoulders. Like courage settling into her skin, the chance came sooner than expected. Halfway through the lesson, the teacher asked them to break into small groups. And just like every other time, he made some loud comment to get attention. It wasn't directed at her, but the energy of it carried toward her desk. A reminder of how many times she had been the target instead. She stood. Her chair made a soft scraping sound on the floor, just enough for heads to turn. The teacher paused mid-sentence. A few students glanced around confused. And Heatha, one who had made her school days feel like a slow drip of dread, looked up at her with a blank, puzzled expression. She took a breath. Then another. Her voice didn't come out loud or sharp. It came out steady. "I need to say something," she said, looking directly at him. He frowned. Not hostile. More like he didn't understand what was happening. Okay," he muttered. She didn't waver. "Yesterday, when you took that poem from my notebook and read it out loud." She paused, and the room grew even quieter. "That hurt me, more than you probably realized." There it was, the truth. Placed between them like an object neither of them could ignore, he looked around, as if hoping someone would interrupt, or laugh, or change the topic for him. But the room stayed silent. Even his friends didn't jump in. They just watched, she continued, her voice soft but full of something solid. "You've made little comments for a long time. You've taken my things, made jokes, tried to get people to laugh at me. I never said anything because I thought if I stayed quiet it would stop, but it didn't. Yesterday was too much. It crossed a line for me." He shifted in his seat, his posture stiffening in discomfort. That surprised her. She hadn't expected him to show anything, not embarrassment, nothing. But something in the way he looked at his desk told her he was listening. "I'm not trying to make a scene," she said, her voice gentle. "I just want you to understand how it feels." The teacher remained silent, watching closely, but letting her speak. A few students looked uneasy. Others looked impressed. But no one looked bored or uninterested. The room felt like it was holding its breath. He finally looked up at her. His eyes confused, not angry, just startled. "I didn't know it was that bad," he said quietly, almost mumbling. "I was just messing around." She nodded slowly. "Maybe you thought it was funny." But it wasn't funny to me. Faint redness crept across his cheeks. His fingers tapped nervously against his notebook. For the first time since she had known him, he looked smaller, not in a pathetic way, just in a very human way. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry. The room reacted in tiny ways, a few eyebrows rising, a few heads turning toward one another. Some students looked genuinely surprised, but there was no sarcasm in his voice. No smirk. Just something honest. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Thank you," she said softly. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The moment itself was enough. The teacher stepped in gently then, guiding everyone back into their groups. But the energy in the room had changed. Something unspoken hung in the air, a sense that they had all just witnessed something important. For the rest of the class, he remained quiet. Not in a sulking way, but in a thoughtful, almost humbled way. He kept glancing toward her desk, not constantly, just enough to show he was still processing everything when the bell rang. Students gathered their things quickly, eager for the break. She moved slowly, slipping her books into her bag with careful hands. As she turned to leave, she heard footsteps behind her. He stood there, shifting uncomfortably. "Hey," he said softly. She paused but didn't step away. "I really am sorry," he repeated, this time more clearly. "I didn't get it before. I wasn't trying to ruin your day, I just wasn't thinking." She appreciated that he tried again. Not for show this time. There were no eyes on them, no audience. Just two people standing near the doorway. "I know," she said. "But it still hurt." He nodded. "Yeah, I know now." There was a long pause. Not awkward, just thoughtful. "I'll stop," he said. "For real?" She studied his face. It wasn't perfect, but it was sincere. And that was enough for now. "Okay," she said. He stepped aside so she could walk past him. As she headed down the hallway, she felt the weight on her shoulders lighten. Not completely, that would take time. But something had shifted. She had spoken up. She had done it without anger or fear. She had been honest, and it had reached him. When she stepped outside into the sunlight, she felt taller. Not in a proud or dramatic way, just in a way that felt real. The world hadn't changed overnight, but her place in it had, and she knew this was only the beginning of the changes still to come. The days after that moment in class felt different for her, almost as if the school had shifted in a subtle way. Not everything changed overnight, but there was a new calmness inside her that she had never felt before. Each time she walked down the hallway, she felt her steps land a little more firmly. As though the ground beneath her had finally stopped shaking, she still noticed things, little looks from people who had been in the room that day. Quiet nods from a few classmates who seemed to respect her more now, and even the way teachers spoke to her with a gentler tone, as if they somehow sensed the weight she had carried before. But the biggest change came from him. He kept his word. He didn't bother her. He didn't make comments when she passed. He didn't whisper jokes to his friends or take things off her desk. In fact, he kept a noticeable distance at first, almost like he wasn't sure what the right move was anymore. She appreciated that. It gave her space to breathe. But what surprised her more was how he acted when they happened to cross paths. One morning, heading into the building, she saw him holding the door open for a group of students. When she approached, he stepped aside carefully and didn't say anything. But he held the door long enough for her to walk through without rushing. It was a small thing, almost nothing, but it meant something to her. She gave a small nod. He nodded back. Their interaction stayed like that for a while, quiet, respectful, almost awkward. But it was the kind of awkward that comes from someone trying to change. Not from discomfort or resentment. One afternoon after school, she was gathering her things from her locker when she heard someone walking up behind her. She didn't jump this time. Instead, she turned slowly and saw him standing there with his hands in his pockets. "Hey," he said quietly. She gave a simple, calm hi. He looked around, making sure no one else was nearby. Not because he was embarrassed this time, but because he wanted to speak honestly. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, eyes shifting to the floor. "About what happened. About what you said." She didn't interrupt him. She just listened. "I didn't get it before," he went on. "I thought teasing was just normal, you know? Like everyone does it. But I wasn't seeing it from your side. I didn't realize how much it built up." She nodded slowly. It wasn't just one thing. It was everything together. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking uneasy but sincere. Yeah, I get that now. I'm trying to do better. Not just with you. With everyone. She studied him for a moment. His voice wasn't defensive. There was no joking tone, no smirk. It was just honest, and she felt herself soften a little. I can tell you're trying, she said. He looked up, surprised that she acknowledged it. Thanks, he said quietly. There was a brief pause. Then he added, I hope you know. I didn't mean for things to go as far as they did. I didn't want to be that kind of person. She took a moment to consider her words before speaking. I believe people can change, she said. But it takes effort. Consistent effort. He nodded. I'm working on it. Something in his expression made her believe that he truly meant it. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Not yet. Not because she was holding a grudge, but because forgiveness, she felt, shouldn't be rushed. It grows naturally, over time. When someone shows with their actions that they are different now, and he seemed to understand that without her having to explain. Okay, she said softly. He gave a small smile, awkward, almost shy but real. Then he stepped away, letting her close her locker and leave without feeling rushed. In the following weeks, small but meaningful moments continued to happen. She saw him helping a classmate pick up their books after they dropped them. She saw him stepping in when a group of kids started teasing someone else, telling them to knock it off. The old version of him would have joined in, maybe even led the teasing. But now he stepped back from the things that used to entertain. Him, people noticed. Some of his friends joked about him being soft now. But he didn't snap back with something cruel the way he used to. Instead, he shrugged and changed the subject. He didn't need their approval the way he once did. One day during lunch, she was eating alone near the courtyard when he approached her. He didn't sit, just stood. Nearby, with a respectful distance, I'm signing up for that volunteer project, the school announced. He said casually, almost as if he was trying not to sound too proud. She raised her brows slightly. Really? He nodded. Yeah, figured it'd be good to do something useful. They need help organizing supplies. That's nice, she said genuinely. He gave a short smile. Thanks. Just thought I'd tell you. She wasn't sure why he wanted her to know, but she sensed it mattered to him as the months passed. The atmosphere between them wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't tense. It wasn't anything close to what it used to be. They were not friends, but they were no longer strangers either. They shared a quiet understanding. One afternoon, after a school assembly, she was gathering her things when he walked by and said, You seem happier lately. She paused. Considering, I think I am, she replied. He nodded. Good. You deserve that. His words were soft, but sincere. She didn't blush. She didn't feel uncomfortable. Instead, she felt a sense of closure settle gently inside her. She realized then that her life wasn't defined by what had happened before. She was stronger now, not because someone apologized, but because she chose to stand up for herself in a moment that once would. V crushed her. Her voice had changed her world, and his world too. On the last day of the school year, he approached her as they were leaving the building for the final time that semester. Hey, he said. Holding out a folded piece of paper, she took it cautiously. What's this? Just something I wanted to say without messing it up out loud. She unfolded the paper and read the few short lines written there in simple handwriting. Asterisk, thank you for speaking up. You made me realize things I should have seen a long time ago. I'm still learning, but I'm trying. I hope your life gets brighter from here. Asterisk. She looked up at him. It already has, she said gently. He gave a small smile, nodded once, and walked off to join his family. She watched him go, not with pain or fear, but with a calm acceptance. As she stepped outside into the warm air, she felt the sun settle on her shoulders. The year had been hard, heavier than most people knew. But she had found her strength, and she had seen someone else change because of it. She wasn't the quiet girl who hid in the back of the classroom anymore. She was someone who had found her voice, and she knew that whatever came next, she would walk into it with the confidence she had earned, one honest, steady step at a time.